I never breathed a word to Clara that I quietly held nearly half of her father's venture capital firm, a position valued north of $20 billion. For a good 23 years, she thought I was just a regular tech logistics consultant, chugging along in my well-loved hybrid, living comfortably but modestly in our Oakland bungalow. Then one crisp Tuesday, an invitation landed that changed everything. Dinner with her folks. I accepted, a quiet curiosity gnawing at me, eager to observe how they would treat a man they considered utterly insignificant, a mere footnote in their gilded lives. The smiles, when they came, were polite enough, but the questions, oh, they were designed to cut, to probe, to remind me of my place. And then, mid-meal, her father slid a leather-bound envelope across the polished mahogany. That was the instant I knew. This gathering had never been about family bonding or shared warmth. This was an ambush. This story, my friend, takes an unexpected, almost cinematic turn. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching this from? And have you ever found yourself at a family dinner, holding a secret that could unravel everything? Let me know. The text message arrived on a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of message that, if you knew Clara and her family, spoke volumes in its brevity. I was 51 years old, had been married to Clara for 21 years, and in that time, I'd learned to read the precise temperature of her silence. This particular silence, the kind that settled over her like a heavy blanket while her artisan coffee, usually her morning ritual, sat forgotten and went cold, meant her parents, Victor and Eleanor Thorne, were definitely cooking up something. "Let me guess," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of our kitchen, a cozy, sun-drenched space in East Oakland we'd made our own. "Your mother. Eleanor's involved." Clara looked up from her phone, a slight sigh escaping her lips, and slid the device across the worn, reclaimed redwood table we'd painstakingly sanded and varnished ourselves 19 years ago. We'd found it at an estate sale, a real gem hidden among forgotten trinkets in an old craftsman home in Berkeley. The message on the screen was brief, formal, and had a chilling edge to it. Dinner. Friday, 7 p.m. Important family matter. Mother. "When my parents get this formal," Clara said quietly, her eyes still on the text, "someone usually gets hurt." She wasn't wrong. Eleanor Thorne, a woman whose entire persona was curated like a gallery exhibition, didn't do casual. An invitation via text instead of her usual crisply written card or a personal phone call. That wasn't a family gathering. That was a corporate summons, a business transaction in the guise of a meal. "We're going," I stated, my voice firm. "Clara, I want to see what they're planning." What Clara didn't know, what she absolutely couldn't know, because I'd spent 14 careful, agonizing months meticulously times, not times, telling her, was that I'd been anticipating this moment. I'd seen it building, brick by brick, in the subtle, cutting remarks at Thanksgiving gatherings, in the way Victor Thorne, Clara's father, regarded me as if I were a complex problem that needed a definitive, permanent solution. I'd felt it in the uncomfortable silence from our daughter, Chloe, who, at 18, had begun treating me with an air of casual embarrassment, a sentiment clearly borrowed from her grandparents. They believed they held all the cards, every single one. They assumed I was precisely what I presented myself to be, a 51-year-old independent tech logistics consultant, navigating the Bay Area in a 9-year-old Honda Clarity and living in a charming, but undeniably modest, bungalow in a rapidly gentrifying East Oakland neighborhood. What they didn't know, however, was the hidden reality, the bedrock beneath my carefully constructed facade. 25 years ago, I had inherited a substantial sum, $500,000, from my beloved grandfather, Wallace Sterling. A man of quiet wisdom and unshakable principles, he'd taught me that true wealth wasn't measured in digits, but in integrity and foresight. Instead of splurging, I made a calculated move. I invested that entire inheritance into a struggling tech venture capital firm, Thorne Global Ventures, then run by Victor Thorne. This was right after the 2008 financial crisis, a period where many promising tech startups and the VCs backing them were drowning in a sea of debt, their once shining valuations plummeting. I had meticulously studied Thorne Global Ventures for months, Its core fundamentals were surprisingly solid despite the market turmoil. Its portfolio companies were well positioned, possessing innovative tech, often overlooked, that I believed held immense potential. The firm simply needed a lifeline, a significant infusion of patient capital, and perhaps a steady hand. So, I began buying shares. Quietly, through layers of offshore corporate entities and shell companies, meticulously structured by a shrewd attorney, designed to be untraceable back to me. It was a game of strategic anonymity. Within 3 years, I owned 15%. By the time I first met Clara at a Tech for Good charity fundraiser, she was volunteering. I was scouting potential investments. I held 31%. By our wedding day, a joyous, understated affair, in a small vineyard in Sonoma, my stake had grown to 42%. Today, as I sat across from Clara in our humble kitchen, I owned a commanding 47% of Thorn Global Ventures. At current market valuations, my position was worth approximately $20 billion. Victor Thorn, the man who believed he was an empire builder, was, in a very real sense, working for me. He just had no idea. Art? Clara's voice, soft but insistent, pulled me back from my silent calculations. Promise me you won't let them bully you. I reached across the redwood table, our fingers intertwining, her hand small and warm in mine. I promise, I said, looking into her kind, earnest eyes. They'll see exactly who I am. She squeezed my fingers, a gesture of unwavering trust she'd offered me for 21 years. When I'd asked her to embrace a modest life, to build our existence on something deeper than superficial appearances and material gain, she'd never once questioned it. When her mother, Eleanor, had repeatedly offered to help us buy a sprawling estate in Palo Alto or a waterfront property in Woodside, Clara had politely but firmly declined. When her father had subtly hinted that I could do better than my consulting work, perhaps join Thorn Global Ventures in some nondescript, easily controlled capacity, she had steadfastly defended me. She had chosen me, chosen our shared world, over their opulent, demanding one. And she had never, not once, made me feel like that choice had cost her anything. But at times had times cost her. I'd watched her parents, year by year, gradually withdraw their warmth, their affection, their very presence from her life. I'd observed them at every holiday gathering, seat us at the furthest end of their sprawling dining table, almost an afterthought. I'd seen them introduce Clara to their glittering circle with a slightly apologetic, almost regretful tone, as if her marriage to me was a regrettable phase, a youthful indiscretion she would, eventually, outgrow and correct. For the past 14 months, I had been deliberately, almost scientifically, testing them, driving my reliable Honda Clarity, a car I adored for its efficiency and anonymity, when I could have effortlessly afforded any luxury vehicle on the market, wearing unassuming, off-the-rack shirts to their exclusive country club galas and tech industry mixers, letting Victor lecture me, often with a dismissive wave of his hand, about business vision. Lectures about decisions I had, in fact, actually approved through my anonymous holdings weeks or months prior. I had wanted to know, with absolute certainty, if they would ever see past the surface, past the perceived lack of material wealth. I yearned to know if my own daughter, Chloe, would love me for the man I was, rather than the societal status I appeared to possess. Clara picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen, then typing a concise response. "I'm telling her we'll be there," she said, a hint of resignation in her voice. "Good," I replied, a sense of quiet resolve settling over me. Outside our window, East Oakland was slowly stirring awake. Our neighborhood, a vibrant tapestry of cultures and dreams, had changed dramatically since we'd first moved here 2 decades ago. Trendy coffee shops and co-working spaces had replaced old auto repair garages and family-run bodegas. Our modest bungalow, which we'd bought for $250,000 in 2004, was now, conservatively, worth upwards of $850,000. We could have moved a dozen times over. We could have purchased one of those sprawling, modernist estates nestled in the hills of Piedmont or a grand, historic home in Berkeley. We could have easily joined the exclusive Palo Alto Country Club, a world away from our community center bingo nights. But Clara had never asked for any of that. And I, honoring my own principles and my grandfather's legacy, had never offered. My grandfather, Wallace Sterling, had instilled in me a profound truth, a wisdom that Victor Thorne, despite his apparent business prowess, had never truly grasped. The true measure of a person isn't what they own, but what they choose to do times, with what they have. That wealth, stripped of wisdom, of purpose, of integrity, was nothing more than meaningless numbers flashing on a screen. Wallace had, in fact, been a co-founder of Thorne Global Ventures with Victor some 30 years ago. But when Victor began cutting ethical corners, compromising the firm's integrity for the allure of quick, inflated profits and aggressive, unsustainable expansion, my grandfather had quietly, decisively walked away. The $500,000 he left me didn't come with a standard will. It came with a handwritten letter, a testament to his foresight and his enduring concern for Victor and his family. I'd read that letter so many times over the years that I could recite it from memory, every carefully chosen word etched into my consciousness. Arthur, if Douglas, he meant Victor, falls again, and he will. For ambition often blinds integrity. Help him, not because he deserves it, but because his family does. Save his company, if you can. But more importantly, save his soul. Make him learn what I couldn't teach him. I had been following those instructions, in my own quiet, strategic way, for 25 long years. Clara stood up, moving around the table, and leaned down to kiss the top of my head, a familiar, comforting gesture. "I love you," she murmured. "I love you too," I replied, my voice husky with emotion. What she didn't know was that every audacious expansion Victor had publicly credited to his brilliant leadership, every risky venture, every strategic acquisition, had been meticulously funded with my time's capital. The ambitious AI startup accelerator he'd lectured me about last Thanksgiving, boasting of his visionary investment, I had approved that funding. The iconic downtown San Francisco Innovation Tower, a gleaming monument to tech prowess that bore his firm's name, my investment had made it possible. Even the firm's disaster recovery efforts after the dot-com bubble burst, when many of their portfolio companies were teetering on the brink, I had quietly bought up distressed assets and held them, stabilizing the portfolio from the shadows. Victor Thorne had spent 21 years treating me like a profound failure, an inconvenient obstacle, and I had spent 25 years ensuring his company succeeded, oftentimes despite him. Friday, I knew with a chilling certainty, would bring the confrontation I'd been quietly, patiently preparing for. And this time, I wouldn't stay silent. Friday evening arrived, bringing with it the kind of unseasonable October heat that makes Northern California's mild autumns feel strangely unforgiving, even as the last tendrils of summer cling stubbornly to the air. I drove our Honda Clarity through the familiar streets of East Oakland, the engine humming a comforting, steady rhythm. As twilight painted the sky in magnificent shades of burnt orange, deep purple, and bruised indigo over the bay, Clara sat silently beside me, her hand resting lightly on the center console, a constant, reassuring presence within my reach. We'd made this drive countless times, hundreds of times over our 21 years together. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like crossing an invisible border into enemy territory, a psychological frontier guarded by old money and ingrained prejudices. Holly Street, with its eclectic mix of small, vibrant bungalows, artfully renovated craftsman homes, and community gardens, slipped past the windows. Kids played pickup basketball in driveways, their laughter echoing in the cooling air. The beloved taco truck on the corner, its aroma of sizzling carne asada wafting sweetly, was doing brisk business. Our neighbors were a diverse tapestry of lives. Teachers, musicians, city workers, small business owners, startup founders with more passion than capital. These were people who measured true wealth in Friday night potlucks and Little League games, in shared meals and mutual support, not in sprawling square footage or volatile stock portfolios. "We don't have to do this, Art," Clara said softly, her voice barely a whisper, breaking the comfortable silence. I glanced at her in the fading light. She looked exactly as she had the night I'd met her 23 years ago at that museum fundraiser in San Francisco. Her dark hair, now streaked with a few elegant silver threads at the temples, framed her kind, intelligent eyes. And that smile, a smile that had, in an instant, made me forget every careful plan I'd ever meticulously laid out, every calculated step I'd ever intended to take. She had been wearing a simple, elegant black dress that night, unassuming yet radiant, while the other women in the glittering room were draped in designer gowns and ostentatious jewels. That's how I'd known, right then and there, that she was profoundly different. "Yes, we do," I said, my voice firm, taking her hand and intertwining our fingers. "We absolutely do." We turned onto Highway 13, then merged onto Highway 24, and the world outside our windows began to subtly, then dramatically, shift. The highway carried us west, then south, through the heart of the East Bay, past the university where I'd occasionally taught evening logistics classes for extra money in our early, leaner years, past the bustling office parks where I still maintained my quiet, unpretentious consulting practice. Traffic was surprisingly light for a Friday evening. Most people were heading into San Francisco for dinner and drinks, or back towards their homes in the inner East Bay suburbs, not climbing towards the exclusive hills of Palo Alto and Woodside, where generational wealth resided, meticulously guarded behind imposing stone walls and impeccably manicured lawns. As we climbed towards the affluent enclaves of the peninsula, the houses grew larger. Not gradually, not organically. That would have implied a certain honesty, a natural progression. Instead, there was a stark, almost jarring dividing line, where modest became extravagant, where lived-in became showcased, pristine and untouchable. Chain-link fences, a symbol of community and accessibility, gave way to towering wrought-iron gates. Cozy front porches, perfect for a morning coffee, were replaced by vast circular drives leading to imposing, silent facades. Our humble patches of grass became sprawling, meticulously engineered grounds. Clara's hand tightened on mine, a silent acknowledgement of the transition. "I used to think this was normal," she said, her voice laced with a strange mixture of nostalgia and melancholy, as she gazed out at the succession of sprawling estates rolling past our windows. "Growing up here, in Victor and Eleanor's world, I genuinely thought everyone lived like this, in these bubbles of manicured perfection." "When did you realize they didn't?" I asked, gently prompting her. "The first time I came to your apartment," she replied, a faint, sad smile playing on her lips. "That tiny studio near campus, art, with the rattling window air conditioner and the perpetually overloaded hot plate. You made me spaghetti with that jarred sauce, remember? And I'd never been so happy in my life." She paused, then a wry chuckle escaped her. "My mother almost had a stroke when I told her we were dating. She had 2 strokes, or at least, that's what it felt like, when I told her we were engaged." Clara turned to face me fully, her expression earnest. She actually pulled me aside at the engagement party, whispered conspiratorially, and asked if I was pregnant. Like that was the only times possible explanation for why I'd choose you, Art. "The memory," she admitted, a shadow crossing her face, "still stings, even after all these years." Eleanor Thorne had maintained a perfectly serene, almost beatific smile throughout that entire evening, all while, I knew, meticulously plotting various ways to subtly, yet decisively, sabotage our engagement. She had offered Clara an all-expenses-paid 6-month European sabbatical to clear her head. She had suggested, with practiced concern, that I might be more comfortable pursuing someone from my own background. She had even, through a veiled intermediary, intimated that a small, discreet payment might help me see reason. I had refused every single offer, every subtle manipulation, and Clara, bless her heart, had married me anyway. We exited Highway 280 onto Sand Hill Road, and suddenly we were in the very heart of Palo Alto's venture capital elite. This wasn't just ordinary wealth. This was generational times wealth, the kind that came with exclusive country club memberships passed down like precious heirlooms, and property taxes that often exceeded most people's annual salaries. This was where the titans of tech, the architects of the digital age, lived and played and quietly orchestrated their empires. "Valley Ridge Lane," Clara said, her voice now completely flat, devoid of emotion, as I turned onto her parents' private road. The Thorne estate sat on 4 meticulously landscaped acres at the end of a cul-de-sac, majestically positioned to overlook the sprawling Silicon Valley landscape like a fortified command center surveying its domain. Its architecture was classic Mediterranean revival: cream-colored stucco walls, a terracotta tile roof that seemed to glow in the fading light, and soaring arched windows that likely cost more than our entire Oakland bungalow. The kind of place that routinely appeared in Glossy Times, Architectural Digest Times, or Times California Home and Design Times magazines with titles like Timeless Elegance Meets Tech Mogul Grandeur or A Modern Oasis of Old World Charm. I pulled our Honda Clarity into the sweeping circular driveway, parking it, a humble, practical outlier, behind a gleaming Mercedes S-Class and a custom-painted Tesla Cybertruck. Through our windshield, the house, with its perfectly balanced lighting and imposing symmetry, looked more like a meticulously curated museum than a warm, inviting home. Every window glowed with a rich, inviting light, yet there was nothing truly welcoming about it, a subtle dissonance that spoke volumes. "Art," Clara turned to me, and for the first time, I saw it. Fear in her eyes. Real, unvarnished fear. "Promise me you won't let them bully you." "I promise they'll see exactly who I am," I said, echoing my words from Tuesday morning. But this time, the words carried a different weight, a deeper meaning. This time, I mean times, all times of me. We sat for a moment longer, the Honda's engine ticking softly as it cooled, the oppressive California heat pressing down even as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon. I thought about the letter tucked securely in my jacket pocket at home, my grandfather's letter. The one that had been a silent compass, guiding 25 years of my life. The one that, if I chose to share it tonight, would change absolutely everything for everyone in that house. "Ready?" I asked, my voice low. Clara nodded, but her hand trembled noticeably as she reached for the door handle. We walked up the winding stone pathway together. A silent, unified front, past the perfectly manicured lawn, that undoubtedly required a team of dedicated gardeners and sophisticated automated irrigation systems. Past the ornate fountain that burbled expensively, a constant, low murmur of luxury. Past the carefully curated landscape lighting that transformed everything into a theatrical stage set, designed for optimal viewing and maximum impact. I rang the doorbell. Through the frosted glass panels of the imposing double doors, I could discern movement within, a brief, fleeting shadow. But when the door finally opened, it wasn't Victor or Eleanor who greeted us. Elena, their long-serving housekeeper, stood in the doorway. Not family, but an observer, a silent witness to decades of Thorne family drama. Her face was a mask of professional neutrality, but I'd known her long enough, observed her subtle cues enough, to recognize the flicker of apology, of weary empathy, in her eyes. She'd worked for the Thornes for 15 years. She'd seen absolutely everything. "Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling," she said formally, her voice soft but clear, stepping aside to allow us entry. "Please, come in." I looked past her, into the cavernous foyer. Gleaming Italian marble floors that stretched endlessly. A colossal crystal chandelier, dripping with intricate facets that likely cost 6 figures to acquire and install. Fresh, professionally arranged floral displays in a monumental vase that I recognized from the home tour Eleanor had, years ago, rather dismissively given us. A piece of antique Venetian Murano glass, naturally. But no Victor, no Eleanor, no Chloe. Just Elena, in her immaculate uniform, efficiently taking our coats as if we were clients arriving for a scheduled business appointment, rather than family guests. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a family dinner. This was, as I suspected, a carefully orchestrated business transaction, and Clara and I had just walked into the opening act of whatever elaborate play they had planned for us. Victor appeared in the foyer before Elena could even finish tidying our coats. 70 years old, yet still carrying himself with the self-assured swagger of a man who believed he had single-handedly built empires, which, I supposed, he truly believed he had. He wore a custom-tailored navy blazer over an open-collared, perfectly pressed Italian linen shirt, the kind of effortless, expensive casualness that came from personal stylists and unlimited expense accounts. His silver hair, perfectly trimmed, gleamed under the chandelier. His deep, even tan, spoke of exclusive golf courses, luxury yacht clubs, and annual retreats to his private villa in Capri. "Art," he said, extending his hand, his grip firm, almost aggressively so. The handshake was a calculated move, designed to dominate. He gripped too hard, held on for too long, his thumb pressing almost painfully against the back of my hand in that alpha male display some men never, ever outgrow. His eyes locked on mine, searching. I knew, for the slightest flinch, the faintest sign of submission he so confidently expected. I gave him nothing, just met his gaze steadily, my own eyes unwavering, and waited for him to release first. He did, eventually, but not before a fleeting flicker of irritation, almost an impatient annoyance, crossed his meticulously composed face. "Clara, sweetheart." His voice transformed completely, shifting from steel to velvet as he turned to his daughter, now almost sickeningly warm and overtly affectionate, in a way it had never, not once, been with me. He kissed her cheek, lingeringly, held her shoulders, and looked at her with an expression that, for a fleeting moment, approached genuine love. That was the bewildering, dangerous thing about Victor Thorne. He wasn't a cartoon villain, a purely malevolent monster. He was, in his own twisted way, a father who genuinely believed he was protecting his daughter from a grievous mistake, from a life of perceived mediocrity. And that conviction, that misguided paternalism, made him far more dangerous than any simple villain. "Where's Mother?" Clara asked, her voice tight. "Living room, darling. You know how she is about her entrances." He led us through the grand foyer, past the sweeping, cantilevered staircase, and the meticulously arranged gallery of family photographs that documented generations of Thorne's success and social ascendancy. Chloe's baby photos, Clara at her debutante ball, Clara graduating from Stanford with honors, and then Clara at her wedding, though notably that particular photo was significantly smaller than the others, and strategically positioned in a discreet corner where casual visitors might easily miss it, almost as if it were a regrettable omission rather than a celebrated milestone. Eleanor rose from a plush, velvet wingback chair as we entered the expansive living room, bathed in the soft glow of designer lamps. 67 years old, she exuded an almost ethereal elegance, the kind that required hours of daily, dedicated maintenance. Pilates, bespoke facials, high-end dermatological procedures, whatever expensive, cutting-edge treatments women of her generation and tax bracket employed to hold the relentless march of time at bay. She wore cream-colored silk slacks and a perfectly draped cashmere blouse, artfully accented with a multi-strand pearl necklace. Pearls, of course. Always pearls. "Darling," she purred to Clara, embracing her with the kind of carefully choreographed hug that deftly avoided disturbing expensive makeup or highlighting any nascent wrinkles. Then, her gaze, sharp and assessing, landed on me. "Arthur?" One single word, delivered with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, a smile that seemed to have been professionally affixed. She leaned in for an air kiss, her lips passing somewhere vaguely near my cheek without actually making contact. Her perfume, an expensive, overwhelming cloud of Chanel No. 5, hung heavy in the air. Probably something that cost more per ounce than most people spent on groceries in a month. "Eleanor," I replied, matching her tone exactly, my voice calm and even, betraying nothing. "Thank you for having us." "Of course, Arthur." "Family is everything," she purred, her smile tightening slightly. The word family came out with just enough emphasis, just enough subtle inflection, to make it abundantly clear that I was, in her meticulously ordered worldview, something distinct, something separate from that hallowed category. A voice from the far corner of the sprawling room startled me, pulling my attention away from Eleanor's polished condescension. "Oh, hey, Mom. Hey, Dad." Chloe, our daughter, was sprawled elegantly on a custom-made sofa, her thumbs a blur across her phone screen. 18 years old, with her blonde hair pulled into a seemingly careless, yet artfully styled, ponytail. She wore designer jeans that probably cost upwards of $400, but were artfully torn at the knees and thighs to project an air of rebellious casualness. She didn't even bother to look up from whatever urgent social media crisis or digital drama demanded her undivided attention. "Chloe," Clara said, her voice soft, infused with a hopeful plea, a mother's yearning for connection. "Put the phone down, honey." "In a second," Chloe mumbled, her eyes still glued to the screen. That second never came. Chloe continued scrolling, continued typing, continued existing in whatever all-consuming digital world she had retreated into, oblivious to our presence, to the tension in the room. This was new. Or rather, this was worse. There had been a time, not so long ago, when Chloe would instinctively look up, would acknowledge her parents' entry into a room. There had been a time when she would have smiled, genuinely. The change was stark, unsettling. "Shall we?" Victor gestured toward the dining room with the innate confidence of a man accustomed to his commands being implicitly, instantly obeyed, not just by his employees, but by everyone in his orbit, including his family. The dining room was everything I had anticipated, and then some. A monumental, gleaming mahogany table, capable of seating 12, but meticulously set for 5. An exquisite crystal chandelier, radiating a soft, opulent glow overhead, the kind that required a professional conservator to climb a custom-built ladder and painstakingly clean each individual piece by hand. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the expansive back terrace and the infinity edge pool, strategically lit to showcase the breathtaking, undulating views of the Silicon Valley hills beyond, a silent testament to wealth and power. And the seating arrangement. The seating arrangement was a masterpiece of subtle manipulation, a silent declaration of hierarchy and intent. Victor, naturally, sat at the head of the table, the undisputed seat of power, the position of judgment. Eleanor was positioned to his right, close enough to murmur strategic observations, to offer subtle cues and unspoken directives. Chloe sat beside her grandmother, already implicitly aligned with the Thorn program, even if she didn't fully grasp the intricate machinations yet. Clara and I were pointedly directed to the opposite side, physically separated from the Thorn family unit, outnumbered 3-2, strategically positioned, so we had to look up the entire length of the formidable table to meet Victor's piercing eyes. It was, I realized with a grim internal nod, courtroom seating, the defendant and counsel on one side, the prosecution on the other, the judge presiding over his carefully constructed domain. The table itself was set with enough sparkling crystal and fine china to fund a semester of college tuition, multiple glasses per person, water, 2 different wines, something else I didn't immediately recognize. Charger plates. That probably cost more than our monthly mortgage. Linen napkins, crisply starched and folded into elaborate architectural shapes. A floral centerpiece, a breathtaking explosion of exotic blooms that looked professionally arranged, a work of art in itself. This wasn't dinner. This was theater. This was a meticulously crafted performance. Elena appeared, a silent, efficient shadow, with a bottle of a prestige Cabernet Sauvignon, pouring for Victor first, then Eleanor, working her way around the table with practiced, almost balletic efficiency. When she reached me, I subtly caught her eye. In the brief, fleeting moment, our gazes met. I saw it. A quiet warning. A shared understanding. She had worked in this house long enough, observed enough of these dinners, to recognize the precise moment when something significant, something potentially explosive, was building. Victor lifted his wine glass. A heavy, exquisite piece of baccarat crystal. The crystal caught the chandelier light, refracting it into tiny, ephemeral rainbows that danced across the pristine white tablecloth. "Before we begin," he said, his voice resonating with the carefully rehearsed weight of prepared remarks, of a pronouncement, "I want to propose a toast." He looked pointedly at Clara, then, with a fleeting, dismissive glance, at me, then back to Clara, his focus singular. "To family," he intoned, his voice swelling with performative gravitas. "To the unbreakable bonds that define us, the enduring legacy we protect, the prosperous future we secure." Every single word was chosen with deliberate intent. Every subtle pause meticulously calculated for maximum effect. Clara raised her glass hesitantly, her fingers lightly gripping the stem. Chloe, finally, briefly, glanced up from her phone, just long enough to lift her own glass, her expression bored. Eleanor's smile was serene, almost beatific, the placid, knowing expression of someone who already knew, with absolute certainty, precisely how the entire evening would gracefully, inevitably unfold. I raised my glass as well, but said nothing, offering no words, only a silent acknowledgement. To family, they echoed, a chorus of carefully modulated voices. The word, in that moment, felt less like a celebration and more like a direct threat. And as we all took a sip of the expensive wine, I realized, with a cold certainty, that this dinner had never, truly, been about family at all. The first course arrived with a studied elegance that made the act of eating feel less like nourishment and more like a meticulous, almost ritualistic performance. Elena placed delicate, artfully arranged plates before each of us. Seared diver scallops, nestled atop a bed of microgreens, dotted with precise, perfectly formed droplets of a vibrant green sauce that undoubtedly had a long, complicated French name. Food designed, I observed, to impress and intimidate rather than to genuinely satisfy. Victor cut into his scallop with surgical precision, his movements deliberate, controlled. "We just finalized the domain expansion project," he announced, as if continuing a conversation we had all been intimately part of, as if I were a junior associate seeking guidance. A 10-year development cycle, $2.3 billion in total investment. Takes real vision to see opportunities like that, to capitalize on emerging tech sectors. He said it, I noted, with the condescending patience of a seasoned professor explaining basic, foundational concepts to a particularly struggling, dim-witted student. Asterisk, I approved that funding. Asterisk, I thought, a quiet fury coiling in my gut. Asterisk, every single dollar came directly from my holdings. You're lecturing me about a project I greenlit 18 months ago. Asterisk. But I just nodded, maintaining my placid demeanor, and said, "Sounds ambitious, Victor." Quite the undertaking. The word ambitious seemed to deflate him slightly. He had clearly anticipated engagement, perhaps an argument, a challenge to his authority. Instead, I gave him nothing. "It's the largest mixed-use tech campus development in Central California," he continued, undeterred, needing to assert his narrative. "Your father understands real estate in a way no one else does, Clara. He built this company from nothing, from absolute nothing." The lie, I noted, was delivered with such smooth conviction, such unwavering self-belief, that he probably genuinely believed it himself. Eleanor, ever the shrewd co-conspirator, picked up the thread of conversation as smoothly as a seasoned relay runner, effortlessly taking the baton. "Clara, darling, did I mention I ran into Maxwell Beaumont last week?" Clara's fork paused, halfway to her mouth, a barely perceptible tremor in her hand. "He's doing remarkably well," Eleanor continued, her voice light, deceptively casual, yet carrying an unmistakable undertone of calculated comparison. "Just bought a magnificent place in Atherton. Absolutely stunning property. 4 acres, panoramic bay views. The private vineyard alone is something straight out of Time's Architectural Digest asterisk." "I'm happy for Max," Clara said carefully, her voice strained. "He asked about you, of course," Eleanor continued, her smile tightening, a brittle, almost cutting expression. "He's still single, you know, still diligently building that impressive portfolio. Some people really do make the most of their potential, don't they?" The implication hung in the opulent air, thick and toxic, like poison gas. Across the table, Chloe finally looked up from her phone, her eyes, for the first time all evening, meeting mine. "Grandfather's given me real responsibilities now," she said, her tone an odd mixture of boastfulness and thinly veiled contempt. I couldn't tell if she was talking directly to me or simply speaking times through times me, an echo of her grandparents' disdain. "I'm coordinating with the development team on the new AI integration project. Real work, strategic planning, not just consulting." She spat the word consulting out like it was something utterly beneath her, something she'd unfortunately found stuck to the bottom of her designer shoe. "That's wonderful, honey," Clara said, her voice gentle, trying desperately to catch our daughter's eye, to connect. But Chloe wasn't looking at Clara anymore. She was looking squarely at me now. "Really, truly, looking at me, for the first time all evening, her gaze sharp, judgmental. Some of us are actually building careers, you know? Real careers with real companies, not just shuffling papers and calling it strategy. The raw, unvarnished contempt in her voice was pure, unadulterated thorn, a chilling echo of her grandparents' ingrained disdain. "Chloe!" Clara's voice suddenly had an edge, a sharpness I recognized. It was the tone that emerged only when she was defending me, steadfastly, for the thousandth time, to her family. "What?" Chloe shrugged, a gesture of casual cruelty that only teenagers, privileged to the point of oblivion, and the deeply entrenched wealthy, can truly achieve. "I'm just being honest. Don't you ever wish you'd made different choices, Mom?" The room temperature, I swear, seemed to drop a full 10 degrees. "Don't you ever wonder what life would be like?" Chloe continued, her eyes now locked, unwavering. "On mine? If you'd married someone with actual ambition? Someone who wanted to build times something? Someone who wouldn't embarrass you at country club events or company galas?" Clara's hand trembled visibly as she slowly set down her fork, the metal clinking softly against the fine china. "That's your father you're talking about," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know who he is, Mom," Chloe replied. And the way she said it, flat, final, utterly dismissive, hurt more deeply, more profoundly than anything her grandparents had ever uttered, anything they had ever done. Because they, Victor and Eleanor, were supposed times to look down on me, to dismiss me. But Chloe, our daughter, she was supposed to be different. She was supposed to see past the superficial surface, to the man who had patiently taught her to ride a bike on our quiet street, who had spent countless hours helping her with her intricate calculus homework, who had sat through every single excruciating school play and every thrilling soccer game, cheering her on, always present. Instead, she had become exactly like them. The main course arrived. Pan-seared Wagyu beef, prepared with a delicate flourish, likely costing more per ounce than I spent on groceries in an entire week. Elena moved around the table silently, her face a carefully maintained mask of neutrality. But I saw the tension, the slight stiffness, in her shoulders, a silent acknowledgement of the emotional volatility simmering beneath the surface. "The point is," Victor said, his voice regaining its practiced composure, as if Chloe's brutal outburst had been a perfectly natural, even expected part of the dinner conversation, "success requires a certain mindset, a willingness to take calculated risks, to operate at a level most people simply can't reach, can't even comprehend. Asterisk. Every expansion you credit to your leadership was funded with capital you didn't even know you had." Asterisk, I thought, my gaze steady on him. Asterisk. Every gleaming tower with your firm's name exists because I meticulously made it possible. You've been operating on my money for 25 years while lecturing me, the anonymous benefactor, about ambition and vision. Asterisk. But I stayed perfectly still, perfectly calm, which I could plainly see infuriated them more deeply, more profoundly, than any impassioned response or heated argument ever could. My silence was a weapon they couldn't comprehend. Eleanor turned to Clara with a practiced, almost theatrical sympathy. "Darling, we simply can't stand by and watch you struggle financially because of pride. There are resources available, opportunities. Maxwell, for instance, mentioned he's looking for a director of strategic partnerships at his new venture. An excellent role, I hear." "I'm not struggling, Mother," Clara retorted, but her voice, despite her best efforts, cracked slightly, betraying the raw emotion she was desperately trying to suppress. "Of course not, darling." "Of course not," Eleanor cooed, her words dripping with a condescending, pitying sweetness. They were circling now, like a pack of sleek, well-fed sharks, each comment, each subtle insinuation, carefully calibrated to remind me that I didn't belong, that I never would belong, that the best, most beneficial thing I could do for everyone involved was simply to disappear, to vanish from their perfectly ordered lives. Dessert came and went, some elaborate chocolate construction, meticulously adorned with delicate flakes of gold leaf. Coffee was poured, a rich, dark roast served in tiny, fragile demitasse cups. Chloe had, to my surprise, returned to her phone, her work, her contribution to the evening's theatrics, apparently complete. Victor and Eleanor exchanged knowing glances, a silent, almost telepathic communication forged from decades of marriage and a shared, unwavering purpose. Then Victor cleared his throat, a sharp, resonant sound that silenced the table more effectively, more definitively than any shout ever could. He reached beneath his chair, his movements deliberate, almost theatrical, as if performing a carefully rehearsed magic trick. When his hand emerged, it held a leather folder, expensive, substantial, clearly of the highest quality. The kind of folder only high-powered attorneys used for truly important, life-altering documents. He placed it on the table, precisely between the coffee cups and the remnants of the dessert plates, with a soft, ominous thud that might as well have been a gunshot. Nobody moved. Nobody dared to breathe. Clara's hand found mine under the table, her fingers cold and trembling, a silent plea for reassurance. Victor looked at me, his eyes now devoid of their earlier condescension, replaced instead by an expression I had seen countless times before in high-stakes boardrooms and tense negotiation tables. The expression of a man who believed, with absolute, unwavering certainty, that he had already won, that he was simply waiting for his opponent to acknowledge his inevitable, ignominious defeat. "Arthur," he said, and for the first time all evening, his voice carried something other than its usual, practiced disdain. It carried an unmistakable finality. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about your future with this family." The leather folder sat between us like a coiled, venomous snake, its contents promising rupture and upheaval. And I knew, with absolute, chilling certainty, that whatever lay inside it would change absolutely everything. The leather folder landed on the table between gleaming wine glasses and delicate crystal with a soft, authoritative thud that instantly silenced the room, the lingering conversations, the subtle clinking of cutlery. Victor slid it toward me with the assured confidence of a man who had closed 1,000 multi-million-dollar deals, who had negotiated contracts worth billions in the volatile tech market, who genuinely believed he understood, with unshakable certainty, exactly how power truly worked. "Go ahead," he said, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. "Open it, Arthur." I didn't move. I just looked at him, my gaze unwavering, across the expanse of polished mahogany. I registered the smug satisfaction glinting in his eyes, the carefully maintained neutrality of Eleanor's expression, the feigned indifference of Chloe, who pretended to scroll idly through her phone, while I knew, watching everything with laser-like intensity from the corner of her eye. "Art?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper, a plea. I reached for the folder, my movements slow, deliberate, each action imbued with a quiet defiance. I opened it. Inside, meticulously stapled with $500 an hour legal precision, lay an annulment agreement. 20 pages of dense legalese, filled with whereas clauses and party of the first part language that, when stripped of its obfuscating jargon, boiled down to one brutally simple proposition. My marriage to Clara had been a mistake, a regrettable error in judgment on her part, and such mistakes, the document asserted, could be corrected for the right price. Clipped to the front of the agreement was a cashier's check for $275,000. The number felt arbitrary, almost insulting, until I did the quick, mental math. At $40,000 a year, which was likely what they assumed a modest logistics consultant in Oakland earned, it represented nearly 7 years of my declared income. Enough, in their estimation, to start over, to disappear, to make everyone's problem simply go away. "Arthur," Victor said, leaning back in his chair like a judge about to deliver a definitive, unappealable verdict. His voice was calm, controlled, utterly devoid of emotion. "I'll be direct. You married above your station. That's not an insult, Art. It's a fact. A simple, undeniable reality of our world. Clara, with her lineage, her intellect, her connections, could have had anyone. She could have had Maxwell Beaumont, for crying out loud. We tried to accept this marriage. God knows, we truly tried. But we simply cannot stand by and watch our daughter struggle financially because of pride. Her pride, your pride. We're not struggling, Dad, Clara started, her voice rising, imbued with a fierce, protective defiance. Sweetheart, Eleanor's voice was gentle, dripping with a practiced, sickening pity. You live in East Oakland. You drive a car that's nearly 10 years old. You haven't taken a real times vacation in how long, darling? A proper trip to Europe? A ski trip to Aspen? We simply can't pretend this is the life we ever wanted for you. This solves everything, Arthur, Victor continued, oblivious to Clara's distress, tapping the check with one impeccably manicured finger. That's more than you'd make in 7 years as a consultant, Art. Sign the annulment, take the money, and move on. You'll be better off, truly. And Clara can return to a life that is truly suited to her background, to her potential, a life she deserves. The silence that followed their pronouncements was not merely an absence of sound. It pressed against my ears like a physical weight, thick and suffocating. Then Clara stood up so fast, her chair scraped violently against the polished hardwood floor, the harsh sound echoing in the stunned quiet. "This is insane!" she cried, her voice trembling with raw fury. "You can't just times by times people. You can't just—" "Clara, sit down." Victor's voice, though calm, carried the immutable weight of decades of command, of a man accustomed to being instantly obeyed by everyone from high-powered CEOs to subservient waitstaff. "The adults are talking. I'm 46 years old, Dad." Her voice cracked, on the verge of shattering. "My husband is sitting right here while you're trying to." But Victor wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking directly at me, a triumphant glint in his eyes, utterly certain he had already won, certain that every man, ultimately, had his price, and mine, he believed, was meticulously written on that check. Then Chloe spoke. "Mom." Her voice was unnervingly calm, too calm, the kind of unnerving calm that often precedes devastating earthquakes, destructive hurricanes, or moments that irrevocably split your life into a distinct before and after. Clara turned slowly toward our daughter, a complex cocktail of disbelief warring with a desperate, fragile hope on her face. "Chloe, your grandmother's right," Chloe said, her voice clear, articulate, utterly devoid of childish petulance. She slowly set down her phone, giving us her full, undivided attention for the very first time all evening. "You deserve better than this. Better than him." The words, delivered with chilling precision, landed like a volley of bullets, each one piercing, designed to inflict maximum damage. "Chloe, don't," Clara whispered, her voice a pained plea. But our daughter wasn't finished. She looked directly at me, her eyes cold, piercing, 18 years old, and absolutely, unshakably certain of her own impeccable judgment. "Dad, be honest," she challenged, her voice devoid of any warmth. "You're holding Mom back. Everyone can see it. You live in that tiny house. You drive that embarrassing car. All my friends' parents have lake houses in Tahoe and custom yachts in Sausalito." She stopped, a brief, almost imperceptible recalibration in her gaze. "You're not good enough for her, Dad. You never were." She said it like a simple, undeniable truth, like commenting on the weather or stating the obvious, undeniable facts of geometry. No malice, no overt anger, just a cold, clinical, dispassionate assessment. "Chloe!" Clara cried out, her voice breaking, shattering. "That's your father!" "I know who he is, Mom." Chloe turned to her mother, and her voice softened slightly, became almost gentle, almost sympathetic. "I love you, and I want you to be happy. But Dad's not making you happy. He's making you settle." She gestured dismissively at the check. "Just take the money and go, Dad. You'd be doing everyone a favor. Mom could be with someone like Max Beaumont, someone with a real future, someone who wouldn't make her choose between her family and her marriage, someone who wouldn't embarrass her." The word embarrass hung in the air, thick and acrid, like smoke from a recently fired gun. Clara broke then, silently, profoundly, crying the way people do when something precious inside them finally shatters beyond any hope of repair. Her hands flew up to cover her face, her slender shoulders shaking uncontrollably. I wanted desperately to reach for her, to pull her into my arms, but I couldn't seem to move. My limbs felt heavy, rooted to the spot, because I'd known this moment was coming. I'd been meticulously preparing for it for 14 months, mentally rehearsing every possible scenario. But knowing isn't the same as living it. Knowing isn't the same as watching your own daughter, your flesh and blood, measure your worth on a scale of superficial status and contemptuously discard you. Knowing isn't the same as watching your wife's parents treat your sacred marriage like a failed business venture that required immediate, ruthless liquidation. I had loved Clara without conditions, without expectations, without measuring her against any external metrics. I had loved her through lean years and quiet, shared victories, believing, perhaps naively, that true respect grew from patience, from unwavering commitment, from shared values. I'd swallowed every single slight from her parents, every dismissive comment, every superficial smile that weighed my income and perceived social standing before my character, before my loyalty, before my deep love for their daughter. I'd foolishly thought that my quiet persistence would soften them. I'd fervently hoped my daughter, Chloe, saw more, saw deeper, beyond the glittering facade. But in that devastating moment, I understood, with a crushing clarity, how neatly money edits a story, how easily superficial comfort masquerades as profound wisdom, how swiftly a carefully constructed narrative of success can overshadow genuine human connection. They weren't offering Clara a choice. They were methodically, ruthlessly erasing me from her life. And the cruelest, most cutting part wasn't the humiliating check. It was the agonizing realization that their definition of love, measured solely in numbers and social status, had already been declared woefully insufficient. Victor watched my silence with undisguised satisfaction, a smug smirk playing on his lips. Eleanor's expression remained carefully neutral, a mask of serene composure. But there was an unmistakable gleam of triumph in her eyes, a victorious flicker. Chloe, her contribution apparently complete, had returned to her phone, immersed once again in her digital world. Only Clara was crying. Only Clara, it seemed, truly understood the profound, irreparable damage that had just been wrought. I picked up the check, my fingers brushing against the crisp paper, and examined it, allowing them, for a brief, agonizing moment, to believe I was tempted, to believe they had, unequivocally, won. "That's generous," I said quietly, my voice calm, even. Victor actually smiled, a genuine, self-satisfied smile, believing he had successfully closed the deal. I set the check down carefully, deliberately, on the table. Then, slowly, I took out my own phone. "Before I respond," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the cold, volcanic rage that was now building just beneath my skin, a quiet rumble of impending eruption. "I need to make a quick call." Victor frowned, his brow furrowing in irritation. "What does your attorney have to do with this, Arthur? This is a private family matter." I looked at him carefully, really looked at him, at the man who had spent 25 years unhesitatingly accepting my money, my investments, my capital, all while blithely dismissing my worth, my character, my very presence. At the woman who had meticulously raised a daughter to value superficial status and material acquisition, above genuine character, above empathy, above connection. At the granddaughter they had so successfully, so thoroughly poisoned against me. "Everything," I said, my voice resonating with a quiet, unshakable authority that surprised even me. Then I dialed Liam O'Connell, the shrewd, unflappable corporate attorney who had managed my intricate financial interests for 25 years, and placed the phone on speaker, carefully positioning it in the precise center of the mahogany table. The dial tone echoed in the sudden deafening silence, a rhythmic, ominous countdown. And I watched, with a grim satisfaction, as their carefully constructed certainty, their smug self-assurance, began, very slowly, to crack. Victor stood up so fast, his chair scraped loudly against the polished hardwood floor, the harsh sound reverberating in the shocked silence. "What do you think you're doing, Arthur?" he demanded, his voice laced with indignation, with dawning panic. I kept my eyes fixed on my phone, scrolling calmly, deliberately, through my contacts list. "I told you, Victor. Making a call. Put that away, he commanded, his voice rising, edged with desperation. We're in the middle of a conversation. No, Victor, I replied, my voice cool, level, unyielding. We're at the end of one. I found Liam's number, tapped it. You made your offer. Now I'm making mine. The room went completely silent, save for the rhythmic, insistent ringing echoing through the speaker. Once, twice, 3 times. Liam O'Connell answered on the 4th ring, his voice brisk, professional. O'Connell here. Owen, everything all right? A bit late for a call. Liam, sorry to call so late, I said, my voice betraying no emotion. I'm at dinner with the Thorns, and we've hit a bit of a complication. Could you pull up the Sterling Holdings file? I need you to walk everyone through the ownership structure of Thorn Global Ventures. A pause on the other end, a brief, almost imperceptible hesitation. The Times full-time structure, Liam. Everything. Start with Thorn Global Ventures. Victor had gone deathly pale, one hand gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles were white. Eleanor looked utterly confused, her gaze darting frantically between Victor and me, a dawning horror slowly creeping into her eyes. All right, Owen, Liam said, his voice amplified through the speaker, filling the once opulent, now charged room. Thorn Global Ventures. Total valuation approximately $20 billion, 100 million shares outstanding. Eleanor inhaled sharply, a sudden, gasping sound. $20 billion? Victor? She whispered, her voice barely audible, laced with a mixture of shock and dawning accusation. Let him finish, Eleanor, I said quietly, my eyes fixed on Victor, who now looked as though he might physically collapse. Primary shareholder, Sterling Holdings, LLC, Liam continued, his voice calm, methodical. Incorporated in Delaware in 1999, owns 47 million shares, which constitutes 47% of outstanding equity. That's impossible, Victor whispered, but his voice, though a whisper, carried no conviction, no genuine belief. It was the sound of a man confronting an undeniable, horrifying truth. Sterling Holdings is institutional. I thought you told me it was a pension fund, an investment firm. Secondary shareholder. Victor Thorn Personal Holdings, Liam continued, as if Victor hadn't spoken, completely unaffected by the growing chaos in the room. 18 million shares. 18%. 18%? Eleanor turned, her eyes blazing with raw fury and betrayal, to her husband. You told me you owned the majority. You told me you owned everything. Remaining 35%, Liam continued, his voice an impassive drone, distributed among various institutional investors, family trusts, and public shareholders. Chloe's voice cut through the stunned silence, shrill and disbelieving. Wait, who owns Sterling Holdings? Sterling Holdings LLC is a single-member company, Liam stated, his voice unwavering. Sole owner, Arthur Sterling, Mr. Sterling has been the majority shareholder of Thorn Global Ventures since 2008. The silence that followed Liam's pronouncement was absolute, deafening. Victor slowly sank back into his chair, collapsing as if his strings had been abruptly cut, his face ashen, utterly defeated. Thank you, Liam, I said, my voice calm, even. Can you confirm the timeline for everyone? Initial investment, March 2008. During the height of the financial crisis, Liam recited, the data flowing effortlessly. Purchased distressed shares at 32 cents on the dollar. Initial stake, 15%. Victor closed his eyes, a pained grimace twisting his face. He was remembering now, the crushing crisis, the banks aggressively calling in loans, the terrifying specter of bankruptcy, and then the mysterious, anonymous investor who had suddenly appeared, seemingly from nowhere, with a crucial infusion of desperately needed cash. Additional purchases occurred over the next 16 years, Liam continued, a relentless, implacable march of facts. 15% became 31% in 2010. 31% became 42% in 2012, following the Continental Properties acquisition, which was funded entirely by Sterling Holdings. 42% became 47% in 2018, solidifying Mr. Sterling's majority position. Every expansion, I said, my voice quiet, but cutting through the stunned silence, looking directly at Victor, my gaze unwavering. Every acquisition, Every single time you needed capital, Victor, and the banks, the major investment firms said no. I said yes. The ambitious AI startup accelerator project, that was me. The iconic downtown innovation tower, me. The disaster recovery after the dot-com bubble burst. When your entire portfolio was on the verge of collapse, me. I quietly bought up those distressed properties, held them, stabilized them until you could redevelop. I was never a mysterious, anonymous investor, Victor. I was your son-in-law. Eleanor's hand went to her throat, a gasping sound escaping her lips. But you're a logistics consultant. You drive a 9-year-old Honda Clarity. I finished, I said, my voice even. I know. I also own nearly half of a $20 billion company. Both things, you see, are absolutely true. Clara was crying silently beside me now, tears streaming down her face, but she wasn't letting go of my hand. Her grip, if anything, tightened. Chloe stared at me, her young face a mask of disbelief, of dawning horror. "You've been rich this whole time?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "While we've been living in that tiny apartment, in that times modest times house?" "Living within our means, Chloe," I corrected gently, my voice soft but firm. "Living honestly, building a life based on what we earned, on shared values, not on what I inherited." "Your mother," I added, looking at Clara, then back at Chloe. "She knows about the money. She's always known. She chose this life with me." "I chose you," Clara said, her voice thick with tears. But her gaze, though tear-filled, was clear, resolute. "I chose us. I chose real over impressive. Every single day for 21 years. Victor finally spoke, his voice hollow, defeated. "The board meetings, the votes on major decisions. You've been approving everything? You've been letting me think I was in charge?" "You times were times in charge," I said, clarifying, "of operations, of day-to-day decisions. You're good at that, Victor. You're a talented businessman when you're not busy measuring your worth against everyone else's, when you're not driven by ego and external validation." "But you could have fired me," he stammered, bewildered. "Taken over." "Yes, Victor, I could have," I confirmed, "but that was never the point." I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. "My grandfather, Wallace Sterling, left me that money with one singular instruction: save his company and save him from himself. He was your father's partner, Victor. Wallace Sterling. You remember him?" The color drained completely from Victor's face. "Wallace. But he died 25 years ago." "He left me a letter," I said, my voice low, resonant. "Instructions. If Douglas Victor falls again, catch him, but make sure he learns something first. You were falling, Victor, gambling on risky, unproven tech ventures, making disastrous, ill-advised offshore investments. Desperate enough to try selling the company, the very legacy my grandfather helped build, to Maxwell Beaumont, without the approval of the majority shareholder, which is me." Eleanor gasped, a sharp, choked sound. "Liam," I said into the phone, "is there anything else they need to know?" "Just one more thing, Owen," Liam replied, his voice still calm, professional. "Any sale or transfer of more than 10% of Thorn Global Ventures equity requires majority shareholder approval. That would, of course, be you, Owen." "Crystal clear." "Crystal clear," I echoed. "Thanks, Liam. Good luck," he said, and the line disconnected, leaving a profound, echoing silence in the room. I looked around the table. At Victor, utterly shattered, his face a mask of disbelief and defeat. At Eleanor, struggling desperately to process the monumental collapse of her meticulously constructed world. At Chloe, her carefully built worldview crumbling around her, her youthful certainty evaporating. And at Clara, still holding my hand, her tears now mingled with a fierce, unwavering determination. "So, here's where we are," I said quietly, my voice resonating with an unshakable authority they'd never heard from me before. "You offered me $275,000 to leave my wife, Victor. That's roughly 7 years of my consultant's salary, according to your estimation. It's also, interestingly, about 3 hours of dividend income from my sterling holdings in Thorn Global Ventures." I stood up, gently helping Clara to her feet. I don't want your money, Victor. I never did. I wanted a family. I wanted to be accepted for who I am. Not what I own, not what I appeared to be. Chloe made a small, broken sound, a soft, choked whimper of realization. But tonight, I continued, my gaze sweeping across each of their stunned faces, you've shown me exactly what you truly value. And it's not family. It's control. It's status. It's the illusion of power. I picked up the torn check, its pieces scattered on the table like withered leaves. I'm keeping this, I said, holding up the crumpled paper for them to see, as a reminder of what I won't accept anymore. Clara, her hand still clasped firmly in mine, moved toward the door. I followed, then paused, turning back to face them one last time. There's a board meeting Monday morning at 9 a.m., I announced, my voice clear and unwavering. I strongly suggest you attend, Victor. We're going to discuss some significant changes in leadership. And Chloe, I added, my voice softening almost imperceptibly as I looked at our daughter, her face now wet with tears. Your position at Thorn Global Ventures is terminated, effective immediately. Not as punishment, Chloe, as education. Learn what it truly means to build something yourself, from the ground up, without a safety net. We walked out into the warm California night, leaving the opulent, silent dining room behind. Clara leaned against me in the driveway, shaking, her body trembling with the lingering aftershocks of the evening's confrontation. That was terrifying, she whispered, her voice still raw. I know, I said, pulling her closer, pressing a kiss to her damp hair, and it was necessary. I know that too, she replied, her voice gaining a new strength. We got into my 9-year-old Honda Clarity, its honest, humble foundation a stark contrast to the mansion behind us. As I started the engine, pulling out of the circular driveway, I knew that behind us, in that silent, shattered house, the reckoning had truly begun. I stayed standing, my gaze steady, looking down at the man who had dismissed me, diminished me. For 21 long years, Victor's face had cycled rapidly from shock to confusion, and now, finally, to something approaching raw, unadulterated fear. Eleanor sat frozen, one hand pressed against her chest as if checking her own frantic heartbeat, her perfectly coiffed hair now slightly disheveled. Chloe's expensive smartphone lay forgotten on the table, its glowing screen ignored, its digital world no longer a refuge. Only Clara moved, reaching for my hand. But in that moment, I was too far away, physically, emotionally, and in every other way that truly mattered, to offer comfort. 25 years ago, I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me, a quiet, powerful surge. Your company was collapsing, Victor. Utterly, irrevocably. The 2008 financial crisis, the bursting of that tech bubble. It destroyed you. Every major bank, every venture capital firm you approached had looked at your books, analyzed your precarious position, and decisively walked away. No one would touch Thorn Global Ventures. He tried to speak, his lips parting, but no words came out. His throat, I imagined, was seized by a sudden, paralyzing constriction. I was 26 years old, I continued, pressing my advantage. I had just inherited $500,000 from my grandfather, Wallace Sterling. Most people, with that kind of windfall, would have bought a luxury car, embarked on a lavish world tour, or invested in a safe, diversified portfolio. I chose differently. I studied your business, Victor, for 6 grueling months. Your core fundamentals, the underlying tech, the innovative spirit of your portfolio companies were solid. Your project pipeline, though temporarily stalled, was strong. You just needed capital. Desperately. You needed a lifeline. So, I continued, my voice measured, precise. I bought in, quietly, incrementally. I pulled out my own phone, opened the meticulously organized documentation Liam had sent me years ago, a comprehensive digital paper trail, and slid it across the table. Incorporation papers for Sterling Holdings, LLC, stock certificates, detailed transaction records, an irrefutable paper trail that simply could not be denied. Within 3 years, I owned 15%. By the time I met Clara at that museum fundraiser, I owned 31%. I looked at my wife, saw the shock, the profound bewilderment, and something else, something deeper, perhaps understanding, perhaps a touch of betrayal in her eyes. By our wedding day, 42%. Today, Victor, I own 47% of Thorn Global Ventures. This is impossible, Victor whispered again, his voice cracking, devoid of any genuine force. Sterling Holdings? It's an institutional investor. I thought it was a pension fund or a major investment firm. You thought what you wanted to think, I countered, my voice flat, because the money always, always times arrived precisely when you needed it. When you wanted to expand into that audacious AI accelerator project, the capital mysteriously appeared. When you nearly lost everything in the dot-com bust, when your portfolio companies were teetering on the edge of oblivion, someone quietly bought those distressed properties, those failing startups, and held them until you could redevelop, until they regained their value. When you desperately needed financing for that iconic Congress Avenue Innovation Tower, the funds, miraculously, materialized. I let each revelation land like a precise, surgical blow designed to dismantle his carefully constructed reality. That was all me, Victor. Every single expansion you've taken public credit for, every success you've boasted about at the Palo Alto Country Club, every single time you've lectured me about vision and business acumen, you've actually been describing decisions, times I times approved, projects times I times funded, strategic risks times I times underwrote. From the shadows, the silence in the room was absolute, profound. You work for me, Victor, I concluded, my voice cutting through the quiet. You just didn't know it. Eleanor made a sound, half gasp, half choked sob. Her meticulously constructed world, a universe built on status, appearance, and the perceived power of her husband, was collapsing in real time, before her very eyes, and there was absolutely nothing she could do but sit there and watch its spectacular unraveling. I turned to Chloe, my daughter, 18 years old, and so utterly certain of her judgments, so confidently dismissive of anyone who didn't fit her narrow, privileged worldview. She looked small now, vulnerable, far younger than her years, and a part of me, a deep paternal part, wanted desperately to take it all back, to shield her, to protect her from the brutal reality of this moment. But she'd made her choice. She'd weighed her father in the balance of her superficial values and found him wanting. Now, I knew she would learn, in the most painful way possible, what that scale actually measured. Chloe, I said gently, my voice softer now, tinged with a profound sadness. I wanted to know whether my daughter valued character or wealth, whether you loved me for who I am or for what you mistakenly believed I lacked. Tonight, Chloe, I said, my voice hardening slightly despite myself, I have my answer. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but there was no taking them back now. Your position at Thorn Global Ventures is terminated, effective immediately. Perhaps it's time you learned what a real times career requires, what it truly means to build something without a safety net, to be judged solely on your merit, your actual contributions, rather than the automatic privilege of your last name. Daddy, please! The word daddy, a childish plea, a term of endearment she hadn't used since she was barely 12, escaped her lips, raw with desperation. But it was too late for that now. I picked up the torn check, holding the crumpled pieces so they could all clearly see them. I never wanted your money, Victor. I never wanted your approval, or your exclusive country club memberships, or your manufactured social status. I wanted to love your daughter, my wife, without caring about bank accounts and property values. I wanted to be part of a family that measured worth in character, in integrity, in genuine connection, rather than in credit scores and lavish spending. I dropped the torn check pieces onto the table, letting them scatter like cold, dead ashes. But you, Victor, Eleanor, you only ever saw someone you believed was beneath you. Someone whose 9-year-old Honda was an embarrassment, whose modest house in East Oakland was irrefutable evidence of profound failure. You never once bothered to ask why I lived that way. You never, not once, considered that it might have been a deliberate choice. Victor finally found his voice, raw and desperate, laced with a pathetic, gasping quality. This is my Times company. I built it. No, The single word cut through his protest, sharp and incisive, like a surgeon's knife. You drove it to bankruptcy. Asterisk I times saved it. While you sat in boardrooms taking undeserved credit, I was the one ensuring those deals closed, securing the financing, stabilizing the portfolio. While you lectured me about ambition, about vision, I was quietly, tirelessly protecting the legacy my grandfather, Wallace Sterling, left behind. I looked around the table, meeting the gaze of each shattered face. I've called an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. The agenda is simple: a vote on the CEO position. You'll be removed, Victor. Professional management will be installed. People who understand that a company, particularly a tech company with global reach, is more than one man's ego, more than a vehicle for personal gain. You can't do this, his voice broke, dissolving into a ragged, helpless sound. This is everything I am. Then perhaps, I said quietly, my voice imbued with a calm, steely resolve. It's time you became something else. I turned to Clara. She was crying, but when I held out my hand, she took it without a moment's hesitation, her grip firm, unwavering. That's what 21 years meant. That's what real marriage, real partnership, truly looked like. We have a long drive home, Clara, I said, pulling her gently toward the door. She stood still, holding my hand, her eyes locked on mine, and together we walked toward the exit, leaving the Thorns to their wreckage. Behind us, the Thorn family sat amidst the ruins of everything they'd so mistakenly believed. Victor stared, utterly defeated, at documents that proved his empire. His identity belonged to someone else. Eleanor watched her carefully ordered world, a tapestry of illusion, unravel before her very eyes. Chloe realized, with devastating clarity, that the humble father she'd so contemptuously dismissed held all the real power she'd thought belonged to her grandfather. And for the very first time in 21 years, they finally saw me clearly. Not as the son-in-law who wasn't good enough, but as the man who'd been quietly, patiently, in control all along. Victor started to stand, his face flushed scarlet with a potent mixture of rage and profound humiliation. This is my... Sit down, I said quietly, my voice resonating with an authority that surprised even me. This wasn't the Art Sterling who had sat silently, stoically, through 1,000 condescending dinners. This was someone else. Someone who had been waiting, patiently, for 25 years for this precise, defining moment. Victor, in a rare display of actual obedience, sank back into his chair, utterly defeated. You see, Victor, I continued, my voice steady, cutting through the thick silence. I didn't just invest in your company. I've been watching you, painstakingly protecting it from your rash decisions, your increasingly reckless choices. And for the past 18 months, I've been watching you try to systematically destroy everything my grandfather and I so carefully built. I pulled a manila envelope from my jacket, documents I'd asked Liam to prepare weeks ago when I'd first suspected the true depths of Victor's desperation. I know about Maxwell Beaumont, Victor, I said, sliding the papers, a damning collection of evidence, across the table. I know about the secret merger negotiations, the clandestine meetings, the blatant disregard for corporate governance. Eleanor's head snapped toward her husband, her eyes wide with horrified realization. What merger? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Victor's face went from an angry crimson to an ashen white in seconds. These are emails, I continued, tapping the documents with a single, precise finger. Communications between your legal team and Maxwell's legal counsel. Negotiations that started 8 months ago. You've been planning to sell Thorn Global Ventures, a multi-billion-dollar firm, without the board's knowledge. Without my time's knowledge. Victor. That's not Victor, stammered, his words catching in his throat. Maxwell has already quietly acquired 15% of the company from smaller shareholders. I interrupted him quietly, ruthlessly. Over the past year. Your plan, Victor, was to sell him your remaining 18%, giving him a combined 33% total, then recommend the board approve a full acquisition, a complete takeover. Clara made a small, choked sound, a gasp of pure shock. Even she, my wife, had not known this times was coming. The proposed price was $10 billion, I stated, my voice calm, clinical. of which you, Victor, would receive $3 billion for your stake. That's what tonight was really about, wasn't it? You needed me gone. You needed Clara unmarried, back under your absolute control. Because if I contested the sale, which I absolutely would have, given the terms and your clear breach of fiduciary duty, the entire deal would have collapsed, leaving you utterly exposed. Victor's hands were shaking now, uncontrollably. You don't understand, Arthur. The company needs nothing, I interjected, my voice like ice. But you do, Victor. You need $3 billion desperately, because you've personally lost over $200 million in the past 3 years. Eleanor stood up so fast, her chair fell backward with a crash that echoed through the stunned silence. What? Bad investments, Eleanor, I said, pulling out yet another set of documents. A devastating dossier of financial ruin, bank statements, trading records, casino receipts from Vegas, cryptocurrency disasters. You bought Bitcoin at $60,000 and sold it at $20,000. Commercial real estate speculation in markets you didn't understand. Complex private equity deals that went spectacularly south. Victor, Eleanor whispered, her voice strangled, a sound of profound anguish. Tell me this isn't true. But her husband, now a broken man, couldn't meet her eyes. The Woodside estate, Eleanor, I continued relentlessly, leaving no stone unturned, has a $3 million second mortgage. The company expenses you've been aggressively claiming, half of them are covertly covering your escalating personal losses. You've been robbing Peter to pay Paul for years, Victor, and it has finally, irrevocably, caught up with you. Chloe was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as she watched her grandfather, her hero, the man she'd modeled her entire ambitions after, crumble before her very eyes, revealed as nothing more than a desperate, reckless gambler. So, tonight wasn't about family, I said, my voice low, resonant. It wasn't about protecting Clara or giving me a fresh start. It was about desperation, Victor. Pure, unadulterated desperation. You needed me gone, needed me out of the picture, so Maxwell Beaumont's deal could proceed cleanly. No complications, no inconvenient questions from the majority shareholder about why the CEO is suddenly so eagerly, so mysteriously, desperate to sell a profitable company. Victor's voice came out as a pathetic croak, a dry, rasping sound. I built this company. I deserve. You built it on my grandfather's foundational vision and my time's capital. Victor, I stated, my voice sharp, definitive. And you've spent the past 3 years systematically gambling it away. The only reason Thorn Global Ventures still exists, still thrives, is because I've been tirelessly protecting it from times you asterisk. The room felt airless, heavy with the weight of shattered illusions and brutal truths. Eleanor had one hand pressed against the polished wall, steadying herself, her world tilting violently on its axis. Clara was staring at her father, her face a mask of profound disbelief, as if she'd never truly seen him before, truly known him. Chloe had gone utterly pale, all her earlier contempt and self-assurance transformed into a raw, gut-wrenching shock. Maxwell knows, by the way, I added, almost as an afterthought, watching Victor's eyes widen in fresh horror. His due diligence team discovered my holdings 6 months ago. That's why the deal has been stalling. He realized you were trying to sell him a company you don't actually control, Victor. He realized you were trying to defraud him. No, Victor whispered, a strangled, guttural sound. No. Yes, I countered, my voice uncompromising. He said what you wanted to hear, Victor, because Maxwell Beaumont is a shrewd businessman, and watching you squirm, watching you dig your own grave, was, I'm sure, highly entertaining for him. But he's not stupid enough to complete a fraud. The word fraud hung in the air, a chilling, undeniable accusation. Fraud? Eleanor repeated, her voice hollow, devoid of all color, all life. What else would you call it? I challenged, my gaze sweeping across each of them. Selling something you don't own? Misrepresenting ownership structure? Concealing the majority stakeholder's existence? That's not just bad business, Eleanor. That's criminal. Victor's face had gone gray, an ashen pallor. This wasn't just humiliation anymore. This was the end of everything he'd built his entire identity on. The successful CEO, the visionary tech mogul, the man who'd transformed a small startup into a billion-dollar empire. All of it, I realized with a grim satisfaction, was a meticulously crafted lie. And now, irrevocably, everyone knew. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, for long, agonizing hours, but was probably only seconds. Then, incongruously, the doorbell rang. We all froze, a tableau of shocked disbelief. Elena appeared in the dining room doorway, her expression a mixture of confusion and profound apology. "Mr. Thorne," she said softly, addressing Victor, her voice gentle, almost pitying. "Mr. Maxwell Beaumont is here. He says you invited him for 8:30 to finalize the paperwork." Victor's face went from ashen gray to a sickly, mottled green, and I smiled, a slow, grim smile, because this, I knew, was about to get very, very interesting. Maxwell Beaumont walked into the dining room like a seasoned general entering a boardroom he already rightfully owned. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit that probably cost upwards of $5,000, its fabric an exquisite sheen. His stride was confident, purposeful, the kind of self-assured gait that proclaimed he was used to winning, that he expected tonight to be no different, merely another feather in his already impressive cap. Then, his eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept across the tableau of shattered lives, and he instantly read the room. His confident smile, that easy, winning expression, slowly faded, replaced by an expression of dawning recognition, then quiet resignation, and finally, something that might have been a flicker of genuine respect. He took in the torn check, its crumpled pieces scattered haphazardly on the gleaming mahogany table. Eleanor gripping the wall for support, her face a mask of profound shock. Victor, gray-faced and trembling uncontrollably. Chloe crying silently, mascara streaking her pale cheeks. Clara holding my hand like a precious lifeline in a raging storm. The utter wreckage of what was supposed to be a simple, celebratory family dinner. "Victor," he said, his voice, once brimming with easy confidence, now losing its smooth edge, replaced by a cautious, almost wary tone. "You invited me to finalize the merger paperwork, but I think I'm interrupting something rather personal." "Mr. Beaumont?" I turned to face him fully, my voice calm, even, unwavering. "I'm Arthur Sterling. We haven't formally met, but I believe you know exactly who I am." Maxwell's expression shifted subtly, rapidly. Recognition, then resignation, then something that, to my practiced eye, might have been a flicker of genuine respect. "I've known for 6 months, Mr. Sterling," he admitted, addressing me directly now, his gaze bypassing Victor entirely. "My due diligence team is very thorough. They discovered Sterling Holdings' position in March, 47% ownership. That's when I realized any legitimate deal would require your time's approval, not Victor's." Victor made a guttural sound, like a wounded animal, a raw, pained noise. "You said he started," his voice a choked whisper, but Maxwell cut him off with a look, a sharp, dismissive glance that conveyed absolute contempt. "I said what you wanted times to hear, Victor." Maxwell's voice was cool, professional, but there was an unmistakable edge of withering contempt beneath it. "Because I was curious how far you'd go, how deep the deception ran. You tried to sell me a company you don't control, Victor. You brazenly misrepresented the ownership structure. You concealed the existence of the majority shareholder, a fraudulent attempt, pure and simple." He let that sink in, the full, crushing weight of the accusation, before delivering the final, devastating blow. "That's not just bad business, Victor. That's fraud. And I don't do business with frauds." The word fraud echoed in the profound silence of the room, hanging in the air like a death knell. Eleanor made a choking sound, a sound of utter despair. Chloe's crying intensified, her small body racked with sobs. Clara squeezed my hand tighter, her fingers digging into my palm, a silent anchor. Maxwell turned back to me, his expression now serious, conciliatory. "Mr. Sterling, I owe you an apology. When my team discovered your holdings, I should have reached out directly. Instead, I let this," he gestured dismissively at the chaos around us, "play out. That was unprofessional of me. I regret that. You were protecting your interests, Mr. Beaumont, I said, my voice acknowledging his pragmatism. I understand that completely. Still, he said, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a crisp business card, which he offered to me. If you ever consider selling, or if you want to discuss legitimate partnership opportunities, perhaps even a strategic alliance focused on ethical tech investment, I'd be honored to talk. You've built something truly impressive here, Mr. Sterling, even if the man taking credit didn't realize it. I took the card, a simple nod acknowledging his gesture. Maxwell walked toward the door, then paused. He looked at Clara, really looked at her, with something that might have been genuine regret, a flicker of a shared past. Clara, he said softly, his voice gentle, I'm truly sorry you were used as leverage in this. Your parents... He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words, his gaze hardening slightly toward Victor and Eleanor. You deserve better than being treated like a pawn in someone else's desperate game. Clara's voice was barely a whisper, thick with unshed tears. We went to school together, Max. I remember. You were always kind, always genuine. He glanced at me, a brief, assessing look, then back to her, a knowing, almost wistful expression. I'm glad you found someone who sees that, Clara, who truly values it. With that, he turned and walked out. Elena appeared to show him to the door, her face a mask of professional composure, and a moment later, we heard the soft, definitive click of the front door closing, a sound that resonated with the quiet finality of a coffin being sealed. The silence in the dining room was absolute, profound, almost sacred in its stillness. Victor sat slumped in his chair, looking at least 20 years older than he had an hour ago. A broken man. His empire, the one he'd thought he controlled, the one he'd planned to sell off to cover his colossal gambling debts and disastrous investments, had just walked out the door, and everyone in his family now knew the brutal, unvarnished truth. He was a fraud, a desperate gambler who had been living on borrowed money and borrowed time, clinging to an illusion of power. Eleanor had slid down the wall into a sitting position on the floor, her expensive silk slacks pooling around her, her once perfect hair disheveled, her carefully maintained facade utterly shattered. She was crying silently, her shoulders shaking, her body racked with a profound, internal tremor. This woman, who had spent decades meticulously maintaining appearances, cultivating an image of impeccable sophistication, had just watched her entire meticulously ordered world collapse in front of a complete stranger, exposed for all its hollowness. Chloe had her face buried in her hands, silent sobs racking her slender frame, mascara streaking down her pale cheeks. The grandfather she'd idolized, the man she'd used as a template for success, had been revealed as a desperate, reckless gambler, willing to commit blatant fraud to maintain his crumbling facade. Clara stood beside me, still holding my hand, tears streaming down her face. But whether they were tears of relief or grief or some complex, swirling combination of both, I couldn't tell. I should have felt a profound sense of victory. I should have felt deeply satisfied watching them face the undeniable, brutal consequences of their contempt, their cruelty, their ingrained assumption that money, and money alone, equaled inherent worth. But I didn't. I just felt profoundly, utterly tired. And I wasn't done yet. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age, its thick paper brittle. It had been sealed 25 years ago with a wax emblem that had long since cracked, a silent testament to the passage of time. My grandfather, Wallace's strong, clear handwriting adorned the front, faded but still perfectly legible, to be opened when Douglas Victor falls again. Before I leave, I said, my voice quiet, cutting through the devastated room, there's something else you need to hear, Victor. Something my grandfather wanted you to know. Something he explicitly asked me to convey, in his own words. Victor slowly lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow, utterly defeated. Wallace. His voice cracked on the name, barely a whisper. Wallace Sterling? Yes, I said, breaking the brittle wax seal, the soft crack echoing in the silent room. My grandfather. Your former partner, Victor, the man you drove away from this company 30 years ago because you compromised everything he believed in. And as I carefully unfolded the letter, its aged paper crinkling softly, I watched the last remaining piece of Victor Thorne's certainty, his carefully guarded self-image, crumble into irretrievable dust. The envelope felt surprisingly light in my hands, but the immense weight of its contents had shaped 25 years of my life, a silent, unwavering directive. My grandfather was Wallace Sterling, I said, looking directly at Victor, my voice resonating with an authority born of truth. But you knew him. You knew him very, very well. Victor's head slowly lifted, his eyes, though red and swollen, fixed on mine. Wallace, we started Thorne Global Ventures together. That was 32 years ago. He left after we had disagreements about how to run the business. Disagreements. I let the word hang in the air, dripping with unstated meaning, with unspoken history. Chloe, is that what you call it when your partner discovers you've been bribing building inspectors, using substandard materials on the Riverside Tech Campus project to save 15% on construction costs? Is that what you call it when you cut corners on security protocols for client data, risking a massive breach, all to shave a few percentage points off your quarterly expenses? Eleanor looked up from the floor, her face a stark canvas where fresh shock was now rapidly eclipsing her profound grief. He left, Victor, because you compromised everything he believed in, I continued, my voice gaining a quiet, inexorable power. Because when he confronted you about your unethical practices, your blatant disregard for integrity, you brazenly told him to either get on board with your vision or get out. You gave him an ultimatum. Victor's face crumpled completely, tears streaming down his ashen cheeks. I was trying to save the company, he whimpered, a pathetic, desperate plea. You made criminal choices, Victor, I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. And my grandfather, Wallace Sterling, walked away rather than be a part of it. He gave up everything he'd built, everything he believed in, because he wouldn't compromise his core principles. He would not sacrifice integrity for profit. A lesson, it seems, you still haven't learned. I unfolded the letter carefully, the ancient paper crackling softly with age, a fragile testament to enduring wisdom. My grandfather's handwriting, strong, clear, remarkably unshakable even after all these years, filled the page. He wrote this 3 days before he died, I said, my voice low, resonant. And he knew exactly who you were, Victor. I began to read aloud, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet, shattered room. Arthur, my dearest grandson, if you are reading this, I am gone. The money I've left you comes from the company I built with Victor Thorne. I walked away from that partnership, not lightly, but because I could no longer stand by what it was becoming. Yet, I never stopped caring about what we had started, about the good we intended to do. Victor is brilliant, yes, but profoundly flawed. He will fall again. He always does. For ambition often eclipses judgment. When that inevitably happens, Arthur, help him. Not because he deserves it, but because his family, Eleanor, Clara, and any children they may have, they do. Save his company if you can. Guide it back to its ethical foundations. But, more importantly, save his soul. Make him learn what I, in my frustrations, couldn't teach him. That wealth without character is utterly worthless. That power, without humility, corrupts everything it touches. That the true measure of a man isn't what he owns, the empires he claims to build, but what he does with what he has, how he treats others, the impact he makes. Do not do this for revenge, Arthur. Do it for redemption. His, and perhaps even mine. I should have fought harder to keep him on the right path, to guide him back to integrity. Be the man I tried to be. Be better than I was. And when you save him, because I believe, Arthur, that you will make sure he profoundly understands that second chances are sacred gifts, not inherent rights. That grace, true grace, always comes with immense responsibility. Use this money wisely, Arthur, and teach Victor what I, in my heart, failed to teach him. That legacy isn't measured in gleaming buildings or overflowing bank accounts. It's measured in the lives you touch, the communities you uplift, and the unwavering principles you refuse to compromise. With all my love and faith, Grandpa Wallace. The last words came out rough, my own voice thick with emotion. I'd read this letter hundreds of times in the solitude of my office, its wisdom a constant guide. But reading it aloud here, now, in this devastated room, it hit differently, more profoundly. Victor was sobbing openly, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably. This wasn't manipulative tears. This was raw grief, the kind that comes when you finally, painfully realize you've wasted decades running from a fundamental truth someone tried desperately to teach you. Wallace never gave up on you, Victor, I said quietly, my voice soft but firm. Even after you drove him away, even after you chose money and ego over integrity, he still believed there was something worth saving within you, and he made me promise to try. I looked at the wreckage around me, Eleanor on the floor, her expensive makeup streaked, her elegance undone. Chloe staring at her grandfather with a mixture of horror and profound heartbreak. Clara gripping my hand like it was the only solid, unmoving thing in a world that had suddenly tilted violently on its axis. I didn't invest in your company by accident, Victor, I stated, my gaze sweeping across each of them. I've been fulfilling my grandfather's dying wish for 25 years, saving you from yourself, protecting what he and you, in your better days, built together, waiting patiently for the moment when you'd finally, truly be ready to learn. I placed the letter carefully on the table, setting it next to the torn check and the damning fraud documents, a quiet, powerful symbol of both betrayal and enduring hope. Monday's board meeting stands, I said, my voice unwavering. You'll be removed as CEO. The gambling, the secret sale attempt, the fraud, there's no coming back from that, Victor. Not as a leader, but, I added, a sliver of that grace my grandfather had spoken of. You'll be offered a consulting position, 2 days a week, an advisory role. No executive authority, no decision-making power. Victor looked up, hope flickering faintly through the devastation in his eyes. But only if you're willing to learn humility, I continued, setting the conditions clearly. If you're willing to admit you don't have all the answers. If you're willing to become the man my grandfather, Wallace Sterling, believed you could be. The man he never stopped hoping you'd become. I turned to Clara. She was crying, but when I held out my hand, she took it without hesitation, her fingers lacing through mine, a silent affirmation of 21 years of trust, 21 years of choosing each other despite everything they had thrown at us. We have a long drive home, Clara, I said. She nodded, stood, her hand still in mine. Behind us, the Thorne family sat amidst the profound ruins of everything they'd believed, everything they'd built their lives upon. Victor stared, utterly defeated, at a letter from a man he'd betrayed, a man who, even in death, had never stopped believing in the possibility of his redemption. Eleanor confronted the stark, brutal reality that her perfect, curated life had been meticulously built on a foundation of lies, on a fragile illusion. Chloe watched the grandfather she'd idolized, the man she'd seen as the embodiment of success, reveal his feet of clay, his profound human failings. And for the very first time in 21 years, they finally saw me clearly, not as the son-in-law who wasn't good enough, but as the man who'd been quietly protecting them all along, as the grandson fulfilling a sacred promise. As someone who profoundly understood that power without grace is merely cruelty, and that the truest, most enduring form of strength is knowing precisely when to offer second chances, even when they seem entirely undeserved. We walked out together, Clara and I, hand in hand, leaving them to sit with the crushing weight of their truth. Tomorrow would bring consequences, difficult conversations, and the slow, arduous work of rebuilding. But tonight, we went home. The drive back to East Oakland was only 10 miles, but it felt like crossing between two different, profoundly distinct worlds. We walked to the car in a shared, profound silence, the Grand Thorne estate glowing behind us like something out of a dream, or perhaps, now, a nightmare. I couldn't quite tell anymore. Clara's hand trembled in mine as I opened her car door, and I held it for a moment longer than necessary, grounding us both, a silent reassurance. The first 10 minutes of the drive passed without a single word. I drove through Woodside's perfectly manicured, silent streets, past the exclusive country club where Victor had so often lectured me about success and vision, past the sprawling estates where people measured their inherent worth in acreage and architectural photography. Then onto Highway 280, heading north, back toward the city, back toward our home. Austin, 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 no. Change to Oakland, Berkeley, Palo Alto, the Bay Area, spread out below us as we descended from the hills, a magnificent sprawl of glittering lights and boundless possibility. Messy, vibrant, and real, in ways the pristine, isolated enclaves of Palo Alto and Woodside would never truly be. The iconic San Francisco skyline glowed in the distance, a testament to human ingenuity and relentless innovation. Our city, our home. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, raw with emotion. How long have you been planning this, Art? This entire thing? I kept my eyes fixed on the road, watching the white lines disappear rhythmically beneath our wheels. I wasn't planning revenge, Clara. Not in the way you might think. The investment came first, years before I even met you. A directive from my grandfather. The testing, the observation. I paused, choosing my words carefully. That was only the last 14 months, the last year and a bit. 14 months? She turned toward me in the dim light of the car, her eyes wide, incredulous. You let them treat you like that for 21 years, Art. You sat through their dinners, and their comments, and their din. Her voice broke, a raw, painful sob. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed I married you only for you, Clara? I asked quietly, the question hanging heavy between us, freighted with the weight of 2 decades of unspoken sacrifice. Not for access to your family, or their connections, or the remote possibility of joining their world? The question hung in the air for a long, agonizing moment. I don't know, she admitted finally, her voice small, vulnerable. Maybe not. Maybe not at first. Maybe I would have wondered. Maybe I would have doubted. That's why I didn't tell you, I confirmed, my voice gentle. I needed you to know, Clara, truly, unequivocally know, with every fiber of your being, that I chose you when there was nothing obvious to gain. That I stayed when every logical reason, every external pressure, every condescending comment said I shouldn't. That I loved you for exactly who you are, for your incredible heart, for your unwavering spirit, not for what you came from, or what your family represented. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could feel the immense weight of everything she was processing. Not just tonight's earth-shattering revelations, but 21 years of choices, 21 years of steadfastly defending me to her family, 21 years of quietly, perhaps secretly, wondering if maybe they were right, if maybe she had given up too much, sacrificed too profoundly. And Chloe, her voice cracked on our daughter's name, a fresh wave of grief. I let your parents poison her against me, I said, the admission like swallowing broken glass, each word tearing at my throat. I thought patience would eventually teach her real values. I thought watching us build a life based on something deeper than money, on connection and purpose, would show her what actually matters. I was wrong, Clara. So profoundly wrong. Tears came then, from both of us, a shared, silent release of years of pent-up emotion. I pulled into a deserted parking lot off Highway 13, the road ahead disappearing behind a blur of tears. And sitting there, the engine idling softly, the city lights swimming through our shared tears, we finally let it all out. All of it. 21 years of holding steady against her family's relentless contempt. The bone-deep exhaustion of always being measured, always being found wanting. The searing pain of watching our own daughter become exactly what we'd tried so desperately to protect her from. What happens now? Clara asked, her voice hoarse, when we could finally breathe again, our sobs subsiding into quiet sniffles. The company will survive, I said, my voice firm, pragmatic. Victor may accept the consulting role, or he may, in his pride, walk away entirely. That's his choice. But the gambling stops. The fraud stops. The company gets protected from his worst impulses, from his self-destructive tendencies. Dr. Petrova, the new interim CEO, is brilliant. She'll guide it into a new, more ethical era. And us? I finally turned to face her fully, taking her hands in mine, my gaze earnest, vulnerable. That's your choice, Clara. I understand if this is too much. If finding out I kept this from you for 21 years, if that changes everything. Stop, she whispered, reaching for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine, a fierce, unwavering grip. I choose you. I chose you 23 years ago at that museum fundraiser. Art, when you were wearing a suit you'd bought at a Goodwill in Berkeley and didn't care who knew it. I chose you at our wedding, when my mother was crying dramatically in the bathroom, and my father barely spoke a word to you, let alone me. I've chosen you every single day since then. She squeezed my fingers, her grip firm, resolute. The man who shared that tiny apartment with me. The man who made spaghetti on a hot plate and called it a date. The man who never, not once, made me feel like choosing him was choosing less, was settling. That's who I love. Not the billionaire. Not the majority shareholder. Just you. Something in my chest that had been locked tight, a coiled spring of suppressed emotion for months, finally released. A profound, almost physical sensation of relief. 20 minutes later, we pulled into our familiar driveway on Holly Street. After the Thorne Estate's 4 acres and Mediterranean grandeur, our bungalow looked small, ordinary, utterly unassuming. But in that moment, it looked perfect. The porch light we'd installed ourselves. The vibrant, overflowing garden Clara had painstakingly planted. The warm, inviting paint color we'd debated for weeks before finally choosing. Home. Inside, surrounded by 2 decades of accumulated life. Dusty old books, cherished photographs, comfortable, slightly worn furniture we'd picked out together at flea markets and estate sales. Clara asked the question I'd been expecting. What about the money, Art? All that incredible wealth? Her voice was still tinged with disbelief, with a touch of awe. I pulled her close, wrapping my arms around her. What do you want to do with it, Clara? It's ours now. Truly ours. I don't know, she whispered, her voice still a little shaky. It doesn't feel real. It's real, I confirmed, and it's ours. We can start a foundation, fund scholarships for kids from East Oakland, help families like the ones in our neighborhood afford to stay as prices rise. Whatever you want, Clara. Whatever will make a difference. And this house, she looked around our modest living room, her gaze lingering on familiar beloved objects. This home. We're keeping it, I said firmly, my voice resolute. I don't need a mansion in Woodside or Palo Alto. I never did. This is home. This is where we built our life together. This is where we choose to be. Where we belong. She kissed me then, soft and lingering, and it felt profoundly like a beginning rather than an ending. Monday would undeniably bring consequences. The board meeting, Victor's removal, Chloe's painful reckoning with harsh reality, difficult, awkward conversations with Eleanor. All of it waiting just beyond tomorrow's sunrise. But tonight, in our small, beloved house in East Oakland, with 21 years of unwavering love surrounding us like a warm, protective embrace, we were richer than the Thornes had ever been, because we still had each other. And that, I was finally certain, was absolutely everything that truly mattered. Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of old pewter, gray and heavy, reflecting the immense weight of the consequences that were about to unfold. The boardroom at Thorne Global Ventures occupied the 23rd floor of the Innovation Tower, the gleaming edifice I'd secretly financed 12 years ago when Victor had desperately needed capital for his ambitious downtown expansion. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sprawling Bay Area, offering a breathtaking panoramic vista of the city. But today the view was obscured by thick, insistent clouds that pressed against the glass like silent witnesses, observers to the corporate drama about to unfold. I arrived early, deliberately so. Liam O'Connell, my attorney, met me in the opulent lobby, a sleek leather briefcase clutched in his hand, containing the meticulously prepared documentation we'd assembled over the weekend. Original stock certificates, irrefutable ownership records, a comprehensive legal paper trail that 25 years of careful corporate structuring had created. "Ready, Owen?" he asked, his voice calm, professional, but with a hint of concern in his eyes. I wasn't sure I was, not truly, but I nodded anyway, a silent, internal affirmation of resolve. The board members began to arrive in clusters, seasoned executives who had worked under Victor for years, outside directors representing powerful institutional investors, the quiet CFO who had probably suspected for months that something was fundamentally amiss, but hadn't dared to ask the uncomfortable questions. They filed in with their steaming coffee cups and gleaming tablets, their professional masks firmly in place, each a master of corporate composure. Victor arrived last. He looked as though he'd aged a decade in just 3 days. The deep, healthy tan had faded to a sickly, ashen gray. His once confident, swaggering stride had become hesitant, almost tentative. He wore a custom-tailored suit that still fit him perfectly, but somehow, now, it looked profoundly wrong, like a costume that no longer matched the character desperately trying to wear it. Our eyes met across the polished expanse of the boardroom. I saw something in his face I'd never seen before, not anger, not defiance, but a quiet, profound resignation. Perhaps even a flicker of relief. He took the seat at the far end of the table, not the head anymore, just another participant in the dispassionate discussion of his own inevitable fate. Liam called the meeting to order at exactly 9 a.m., his voice resonating with crisp, professional authority. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for convening on such short notice. This emergency session has been called by Arthur Sterling, the majority shareholder of Thorn Global Ventures, to address immediate governance concerns regarding the firm's leadership and ethical conduct. The room shifted, a collective rustle of expensive suits and strained anticipation. Eyes, sharp and curious, turned to me. Some board members had clearly done their homework over the weekend, their expressions betraying a dawning understanding. Others were, just now, in that very moment, realizing the full, profound implications of the term majority shareholder as it pertained to Arthur Sterling, the quiet logistics consultant. Liam presented the documentation methodically, with an almost surgical precision. The incorporation papers for Sterling Holdings, LLC, the stock purchase records dating back 25 years, a relentless march of undeniable facts. The current unambiguous ownership structure, Arthur Sterling 47%, Victor Thorn 18%, the remaining 35% distributed among various institutional and private investors. The numbers, stark and unyielding, told the entire story, far more cleanly and definitively than any impassioned speech ever could. The primary agenda item, Liam continued, his voice unwavering, is a vote on the current Chief Executive Officer position. Mr. Sterling has raised serious concerns about recent executive decisions that may have exposed Thorn Global Ventures to significant legal and financial risk, as well as potential reputational damage within the ethical tech community. He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The board members who needed to know had already received confidential briefings over the weekend about the Maxwell Beaumont situation, Victor's undisclosed gambling losses, the attempted sale without majority shareholder approval, the historical pattern of ethical compromises. Discussion? Liam asked, his gaze sweeping across the tense faces. Dr. Lena Petrova, the firm's highly respected chief operating officer, spoke first. I move we vote immediately. The evidence, presented in the confidential briefings and now publicly affirmed, speaks for itself. To delay would be a dereliction of our fiduciary duty to the shareholders and the firm's ethical mission. Seconded, said one of the outside directors, a seasoned veteran of Silicon Valley corporate governance. No one defended Victor. No one spoke in his favor. Some faces showed a flicker of sympathy, a fleeting acknowledgement of a long career. But sympathy, they all knew, doesn't change fiduciary duty. This wasn't personal. This, brutally, was business. And that, in a strange, detached way, somehow made it even worse. All in favor of removing Victor Thorn from the position of Chief Executive Officer? Hands rose around the table, a sea of agreement. I counted silently. 14 in favor, opposed, 4 hands, a small cadre of loyalty, perhaps, or simply a deep-seated reluctance to participate in the public ending of a long, once illustrious career. 78%. Far more than enough to carry the motion. The motion carries, Liam said, his voice flat, emotionless. Effective immediately, Victor Thorn is removed from the position of CEO. An interim management team has been selected and will assume leadership tomorrow morning, with Dr. Lena Petrova serving as interim CEO. Not me. I'd made that abundantly clear from the very beginning. I didn't want to times the company. I wanted to protect it, to guide it back to its ethical roots, to fulfill my grandfather's vision. There was a profound, fundamental difference. Victor stood slowly, gathering his tablet and phone with movements that seemed rehearsed, as if he'd been practicing this devastating moment in his mind for days, for weeks. He looked around the table once, his gaze lingering on colleagues who'd worked beside him for years, on the polished boardroom where he'd made decisions that had shaped skylines and pioneered new tech ventures. Then, he walked out without a word. No dramatic speech, no furious protest, no public breakdown, just quiet dignity and profound defeat, which, somehow, was far more painful to watch than any outburst would have been. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt like a definitive punctuation mark on an entire era. I felt tired. Not victorious, not satisfied, not even truly relieved, just utterly exhausted by the immense weight of what I'd had to do, and by the profound, far-reaching cost it had exacted from everyone involved. The interim CEO, Dr. Lena Petrova, a brilliant, no-nonsense woman who had been running the firm's complex operations for 3 years, took the empty seat at the head of the table. "Let's talk about next steps," she said, her voice brisk, efficient. And the meeting continued, seamlessly, with the mundane details of transition plans, communication strategies, and forward-looking objectives. But I was thinking about Victor walking out that door, about the man my grandfather had once called a friend, a partner, about whether true redemption was genuinely possible for someone so deeply flawed, or if I had simply destroyed him while meticulously convincing myself I was saving him. The meeting adjourned at 9:15 a.m. 11 minutes. 11 minutes to end a career. Over the next 2 days, my phone silently collected 1-2 voicemails from Chloe. I didn't listen to them. Couldn't. Not yet. Clara's phone lit up constantly with a barrage of texts. "Mom, please. I didn't understand. I'm sorry. Please talk to me." She didn't respond. Not yet. By Tuesday evening, Chloe had apparently realized that without the Thorn Global Ventures connection on her resume, without the implicit promise of nepotism and family influence, no one was returning her calls. The high-powered marketing firms she'd applied to, the coveted positions she'd assumed were hers for the asking, all went silent. The job market, it seemed, had a brutal, unforgiving way of teaching lessons that 18 years of privilege and entitlement had thoroughly obscured. Lessons about merit, about genuine value, about what you're actually worth when the family name can't magically carry you through. Clara found me on the back porch Tuesday night, sipping a quiet cup of decaf, looking out over the twinkling lights of East Oakland. The city spread out below us like a living, breathing tapestry. "She's learning," Clara said quietly, sitting beside me, her voice soft, contemplative. "The hard way." "Is there any other way?" I asked, looking out into the familiar darkness. I didn't have an answer for that. Somewhere across town, in his now diminished world, Victor was learning, too, learning what it meant to finally face real consequences. Learning that second chances, if they came at all, came with stringent conditions. Learning, perhaps, what my grandfather, Wallace Sterling, had tried so desperately to teach him 30 years ago. And I realized, was learning that power, without a clear, ethical purpose, is just destruction, no matter how justified you might believe it to be. Eleanor called Clara 17 times between Monday and Wednesday. Each call went directly to voicemail. Each message grew progressively more desperate, more unhinged. I heard fragments when Clara played them back for me Tuesday evening, her phone clutched tightly in both hands, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Clara, sweetheart, please, just let me explain." Click. "Baby, I know we hurt you. Please, just give me 5 minutes." Click. "Your father won't eat. He just sits staring at Wallace Sterling's letter. Please, call me back." Click. By Wednesday morning, Clara's resolve had cracked. I found her in the kitchen at 6 a.m., the first rays of dawn barely filtering through the window, dark circles under her eyes, her face drawn. "I want to be angry," she said, her voice raw, filled with pain. "I want to make them suffer the way they made us suffer for 21 years. But all I can think about is my dad sitting alone, broken, and I." Her voice broke, dissolving into a fresh wave of tears. I pulled her gently against my shoulder, holding her close. You don't have to choose between anger and compassion, Jules. You can feel both. It's okay. Can I? She asked, her voice muffled against my shirt. Really? Yeah, I affirmed, kissing the top of her head. That's not weakness, Jules. That's being human. That's resilience. She nodded slowly. I think I need to talk to her, she finally said, her voice stronger. But I'm scared nothing will change. Scared they'll just manipulate me again. Then you set the terms, Clara, I said, pulling back slightly to look into her eyes, my gaze steady. You decide what reconciliation looks like. You hold the power here now. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a renewed determination hardening her gaze. Okay, but not yet. Not just yet. That afternoon, a courier arrived at our door. Delivery for Mrs. Clara Sterling, he said, extending a thick, cream-colored envelope adorned with Eleanor's elegant, embossed monogram. I signed for it, a quick, almost automatic gesture, and set it carefully on the kitchen counter. Heavy cardstock, a burgundy wax seal bearing Eleanor's distinctive family crest. My name was nowhere on it. This, I knew, was for Clara alone. Clara arrived home at 5:30 p.m., her arms laden with groceries, chatting cheerfully about a scholarship recipient for the nascent foundation. She was smiling, her face alight with purpose, until she saw the envelope on the counter. The smile died, replaced by a cautious apprehension. That's my mother's stationery, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Clara approached the envelope carefully, as if it might bite her, running her thumb across the elaborate wax seal, its intricate family crest. Do you want privacy? I asked. No, she replied, her eyes fixed on the letter. Stay. I need you here. She carefully broke the seal and extracted 3 pages, written in Eleanor's distinctive, elegant hand. The letters wavered slightly, betraying a tremor, the subtle signs of arthritis making precise control difficult. Clara read in silence. I watched, intently, as a complex kaleidoscope of emotions flickered across her face. Anger, grief, profound surprise, a fragile, tentative hope. When she finished, she slowly, deliberately, handed me the letter. My dearest Clara, I'm writing this by hand because a typed letter felt too cold, too impersonal, too much like the business transactions that have defined our relationship. My fingers ache as I write this, darling. The doctor says it's arthritis. But I think, in my soul, it's shame. A profound, crushing shame. And I need you to see the effort, to feel the raw honesty in this physical act of writing. Every stroke. I've spent the past 3 days, since that catastrophic dinner, trying, truly trying, to understand how I became the kind of mother who would hand her son-in-law a check for $275,000 and, with a smile, tell him to leave her daughter. How I became a woman who believed that was an acceptable, even at times right asterisk thing to do. I taught you, from the time you were a small girl, that love was transactional, a negotiation, that marriage was a contract between families, a strategic alliance, that your inherent worth, your value in society, came solely from the man you chose and the lavish life he could conspicuously provide. When you fell in love with Arthur, with Owen, I saw only failure, not his, Clara. Yours. And, shamefully, mine. I believed I had given you every conceivable advantage, every privilege, every opportunity, and you chose a logistics analyst who drove a 9-year-old car, who lived in a bungalow in Oakland. I was humiliated, deeply, profoundly humiliated. For 21 long years I punished you for that choice. Every dinner declined. Every veiled cruelty about Arthur's clothes or his modest career. Every single time I subtly, or not so subtly, mentioned Maxwell Beaumont, hinting at the life you could have had. God, Clara, I'm so sorry about Maxwell, but you never wavered. You held Arthur's hand through every humiliation, through every slight, through every condescending remark. You built a life that had more authenticity, more genuine love, more true happiness in its 800 square feet than our Westlake estate has in all its 5,000. And I, Clara, I hated you for it. Not consciously, perhaps, not with malice, But I hated that you were happy without the things I'd accumulated, without the status I chased. I hated that you proved everything I'd built my identity on was hollow, superficial, ultimately meaningless.